So we're going to go over this new method, this new technique that I want you guys to practice using when you're writing your memoirs. And so showing, not telling is an important technique used when writing that breathes life into your story. So when you show, don't tell, it's basically a way to make your writing not boring. So telling sentences just tell us something. They give vague, general, non-specific information that don't involve the reader. So Jack was afraid. That's good to know, but it's kind of boring, right? If we just have the sentence, Jack was afraid, that doesn't really tell us much. It's just telling us how he's feeling. But why is he afraid? Where is he? What is he doing? What's happening in his surroundings that is making him feel afraid? If all the stories that we read were just, I'm afraid, I'm hungry, I want food, so I went to the fridge, we would hate reading because reading would be boring. The way that we breathe life to these stories is we give it descriptive language. We show, we don't tell. And so showing sentences show us something. They describe scenes and they describe actions. They help us see by using clear, specific details to create strong pictures in our minds, right? And what else creates strong pictures in our minds? Figurative language. So figurative language helps show in sentences. So instead of saying Jack was afraid, now our example has turned into a showing example, right? So our example at the top, the telling sentence was Jack is afraid. And if we go to change that into a showing sentence, we would have, as the footsteps tapped closer and closer, Jack felt his stomach muscles tighten. He flattened himself to the wall, the gritty bricks against his cheek. Sweat chilled his palms. He used both hands to steady the gun. So that already helps us understand what Jack is going through, right? Jack was afraid, okay, is he afraid of spiders? Is he afraid of lizards, which I'm terrified of? Is he afraid of disappointing his parents? No, Jack is afraid because clearly he's in a situation that he doesn't want to be in, right? As the footsteps tapped closer and closer. So somebody's there that Jack doesn't want to be there, right? Jack felt his stomach muscles tighten. So now we know it's showing us that he's afraid. He flattened himself to the wall, so he's trying to make himself disappear, right? When you flatten yourself to the wall, the gritty bricks against his cheeks. So even though the bricks are like rubbing up against his cheeks, he's trying his best to hide. Sweat chilled in his palms, right? So when our hands are sweaty, you know that you're nervous. It's a very common feeling that a lot of us get. Our palms get sweaty, we get clammy, our stomach muscles feel funky. And then he used both hands to steady the gun. And oof, that already tells us so much. It shows us so much, right? If you have a gun in your hand and you're confident, you're going to be able to hold it with one hand. You're going to be able to point. You're going to be able to shoot. But if you're nervous and if you're feeling afraid, you don't really want to hold the gun. You're going to need both hands to steady it because it's obvious that his hands are shaking. So he's using both hands to keep it steady, to keep it aimed. So instead of just telling us that Jack was afraid, now we know why he's afraid. He's clearly in a situation that is making him where he has a gun in his hand. His muscles are tightened. Somebody's there that he doesn't want to be there, right? Maybe it's like a break-in or who knows, but somebody's there that he doesn't want to be there. So it's showing us how he's afraid. So we're going to put this into practice. And we have, what's the secret, right? How do I show and not tell? So I'm going to walk you guys through some steps on how to show and not tell when you're writing. So the main secret for showing and not telling is to be specific, right? Use figurative language and descriptive detail to make each sentence powerful and clear. And so I'm going to exit out of here because I have an example for you guys, right? And so the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to give you the example. School is boring. And I'm going to walk you through it step by step onto how I would turn this into a showing sentence. So, school is boring. That's great. That's good to know. But why is it boring? Show me why it's boring, right? Don't just tell me. So if I were to go through this, I would grab a piece of paper and I would write down some things that made school boring. So I'm going to go through it as if I was the one writing this. So I'm going to make it in first person. So I'm going to use the word I, right? So I'm going to make it in first person. I'm going to use the word I. And then I'm going to write down some things that made school boring for me. So when I was in school, I loved school. I was a nerd. I loved being at school. However, my most boring subject was math. I don't like math. Math and I do not get along. We are not friends, okay? You guys are blessed. You have teachers like Ms. Hamilton and Mr. Soma who are phenomenal at math and teaching math. But I did not have that much luck when I was in high school. My math teacher was not cool. So my math teacher was boring. And what made her boring? Let's see. So what made my math teacher boring? She had a very boring voice. So I'm going to write that down. Boring voice. She also, and if you have a boring voice, I tell you guys this word, it's monotonous. So monotonous, and I taught you guys this word a couple times, so hopefully you remember. If not, monotonous is when you talk like this, and it's very steady and still and boring, and I'm not really sure what else to say. And so that's monotonous, and that's how my math teacher was, which was very boring. So we have a boring voice. What else? I did not understand math, okay? So sometimes, and I'm telling you guys this, so keep this in mind, sometimes when you don't understand something, you think it's boring, but really it's because you don't understand it. So keep that in mind as you go through all your subjects and all of that. Just because it's boring doesn't necessarily mean that it actually is boring. You might just not understand the subject. So reach out to your teacher, talk to them, see if maybe they'll give you guys extra tutoring, and maybe once you understand it, the subject won't become as boring, because once you know something and you understand it and you kind of learn to love it, you want to learn more about it. And so that was not me in math, right? So I found math boring because I did not understand it. So I didn't understand math, especially, and I wrote that down here, especially geometry. And we had words like pi and the square root of pi, and that was not me, okay? I don't know pi, I don't know square roots. Well, I know that the square root of 4 is 2, but that's about it. So that was math for me, right? It was boring. And so what would I do? What kind of actions would I take? So I have actions down here. So what kind of actions would I take when thinking about math, right? So, like I'm doing right now with my pen, I would tap my pen. So I would tap my pen or pencil. I would tap my pencil against the desk, right? Against my desk, because I just wanted time to go by fast, and I thought that maybe playing with my pencil and doing this thing would make the time go by faster, but it didn't. A lot of you guys would put your headphones in. But we're not going to put that down because I was a good student. I did not put my headphones in. I followed the rules. So I would tap my pencil. I would also look around at what other students were doing. So I would look at what other students were doing. Look at other students to see what they were doing. Some of them would be taking notes because they got it. I didn't understand it. I would also look at the clock. Oh my God. I would look at the time every 2 minutes thinking that a whole 30 minutes had passed by. But would it? No, not at all. So I would look at the time, and no time had passed by since the last time. And it would just make things worse. So these are just some things, right? Some things that made school very boring for me. Math class, my teacher, who had a very boring voice, and the subject itself, because I didn't understand it. The fact that I would look at the clock every 2 seconds, and me tapping my pencil against my desk. So we have the example, school is boring, okay? To show, now we're going to use descriptive detail to show why school is boring. So I'm going to use my point of view, and I'm going to start with the word I, right? And I'm going to say, I sighed loudly, because I would also do that a lot. Rolls eyes. I sighed loudly as the math teacher droned on in her monotonous voice about pi and square root, period. So sometimes when you're showing and not telling, the best way to do this is to write multiple sentences. So school is boring is one very boring sentence. It's 3 words. It's not that descriptive. When we give descriptive detail, it makes our writing longer, and it makes it more effective and more clear. So instead of writing just one sentence, I'm going to make it into multiple sentences. So I sighed loudly as the math teacher droned on in her monotonous voice about pi and square root. What else would I do? I would tap my pencil. So I tapped my pencil against the hard, cold, I'm going to go with cold first, against the cold, hard, wooden surface of my desk, looking at the clock every so often. So now I have those 2 details there, right? Me tapping my desk and looking at the clock. And I'm going to use a little bit of hyperbole now, right? So I'm going to exaggerate how I felt. So that's going to help the reader understand exactly how it felt, and that's going to help you guys understand exactly how I felt when I was in class. And you guys can relate to this because I know that y'all say this all the time. Miss, I looked at the clock and only 2 minutes had passed by, but I thought the bell was about to ring. I get it. So only 2 minutes had passed by since I had last looked at it, but it felt like 20 years had gone by. And that is a showing and not telling sentence. So when you're writing your showing and not telling sentences, you go from something, right, that is very telling, very bland, school is boring, and now we have a sentence like this. I sighed, or I guess a couple sentences like this. I sighed loudly as the math teacher droned on in her monotonous voice about pi and square root. I tapped my pencil against this cold, hard, wooden surface of my desk, looking at the clock every so often. Only 2 minutes had passed by since I had last looked at it, but it felt like 20 years had gone by. So now you guys have a deeper understanding of why school is boring to me, right? We know I'm in math class. We know that I sigh loudly, right? So that's appealing to our imagery. It's appealing to our sense of hearing. It's imagery there. The word monotonous also is a form of using imagery. It's descriptive language that helps us hear the type of voice that the teacher had. I tapped my pencil against the cold, hard, wooden surface of my desk. That's 2 points for imagery. Again, I tapped my pencil, right? You can hear it. It's appealing to our sense of hearing. And then the cold, hard, wooden surface of my desk is also appealing to our sense of touch. And I've used this example multiple times with you guys. And then I would look at the clock every so often, right? Now I'm using hyperbole, and I'm also using simile. So I kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? So I'm using only 2 minutes had passed by since I had last looked at the clock, but it felt like 20 years had gone by. So it felt like 20 years had gone by is hyperbole. It's an exaggeration because 20 years cannot go by in the span of 2 minutes, right? I'm exaggerating how much time it felt like to me. And I'm also comparing using like or as. So using the word like, I'm comparing the reality of the situation to my feelings. So the reality is that 2 minutes had gone by, but my feelings is that 20 years had gone by. So I'm using simile, hyperbole, and imagery all in a span of 3 sentences. And so when we practice showing and not telling, we practice using figurative language and descriptive language, and our writing becomes more clear, it becomes more precise, and the reader gets to actually imagine what the writer is going through.